At our wedding anniversary party, my 4 years old toddler looked at my wife's male office best friend and said, "Daddy, can we go home now?" The room went silent. Glass slipped from my hand. And so did everything I thought I knew. All the guests turned to stare at me. What I did next made them regret everything. You know how sometimes you can feel something coming before it hits you? Like when you're driving and you see brake lights way up ahead, and you just know traffic's about to suck? That's what I should have felt walking into our backyard that night, seeing all those people laughing and toasting under the string lights I'd hung myself that morning. But I didn't. I was riding high on 7 years of what I thought was pure happiness, completely blind to the freight train barreling straight for my chest. The party was perfect. At least, it looked perfect from where I stood by the bar, watching my wife Clara work the crowd like she always did. She had this way about her. This magnetic thing that made everyone lean in when she talked, made them laugh at her stories, made them feel like they were the only person in the room. Tonight she was wearing that midnight blue dress that hugged her in all the right places, the one I'd bought her for our 5th anniversary. Her dark hair was swept up in some fancy twist that probably took her an hour, but looked effortless. She was glowing, man. Absolutely radiant. I'd spent weeks planning this thing. The golden fairy lights strung between the oak trees in our backyard, casting everything in this warm, dreamy glow. White tablecloths on every table, real ones, not that plastic nonsense. I'd hired Marcus and his jazz trio, the same guys who played at our wedding, and they were set up by the pool, filling the air with that smooth, sultry sound that always made Clara close her eyes and sway. The centerpieces were white roses and baby's breath, simple but classy. And the cake? Jesus, the cake. I'd driven clear across town to that fancy bakery on 5th Street to get her favorite vanilla bean cake with the buttercream frosting that tastes like heaven. Everyone was there. My whole crew from the firm, Bryce, Tommy, even old Mr. Henderson, who never showed up to anything. Clara's sister, Noelle, flew in from Denver with her kids. Mom and Dad drove up from Tampa, which was a miracle considering Dad's hip surgery last month. Hell, even Clara's work friends were there, the whole gang from Morrison and Associates where she worked as a marketing director. They were good people, most of them. Always treated me right when I'd show up to their office happy hours or company picnics. But then there was Miles. Miles fucking Davidson, with his perfect teeth and his perfect hair and his perfect way of always being right there whenever Clara needed something. He'd been hovering near her all night, like he always did at these things. Laughing just a little too loud at her jokes, standing just a little too close when she was telling stories, refilling her wine glass before she even asked. I used to think I was being paranoid, you know? Like, what kind of insecure asshole gets jealous of his wife's work buddy? Clara always said they were just friends, had been since she started at Morrison 3 years ago. He's like a brother, she'd tell me whenever I'd make some stupid joke about him. Relax, Gray. You're being ridiculous. So I relaxed. I ignored the way he looked at her. Ignored how he always seemed to know exactly what she was thinking before she said it. Ignored the inside jokes and the shared glances and the way he'd text her on weekends about work stuff. I was a good husband. A trusting husband. A complete fucking idiot. The night was perfect until it wasn't. I was standing by the dessert table, watching Isla, our 4-year-old daughter, my whole world wrapped up in pigtails and a yellow sundress. As she made her rounds, charming every adult within a 50-foot radius. She was tired, I could tell. Past her bedtime by at least an hour, but she was such a trooper, saying please and thank you to everyone, giving hugs to her grandparents, being the perfect little angel she always was. I watched her toddle over to where Clara was standing with her work crowd, probably about to ask if she could have another piece of cake, or maybe to complain that her feet hurt in those little white patent leather shoes. But instead, she walked right past Clara, walked right past her own mother, and wrapped her tiny arms around Miles' legs. And then she looked up at him with those big blue eyes, my eyes, I'd always thought, and said the words that split my universe clean in half. Daddy, can we go home now? The champagne flute in my hand might as well have been made of tissue paper. It slipped through my fingers like water, crashing against the marble patio with a sound that seemed to echo forever. Crystal shards scattered across the stone, catching the fairy lights like tiny stars. But that wasn't the only thing that shattered. Everything stopped. The jazz trio kept playing, but it felt like someone had hit the mute button on the rest of the world. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Every single person at that party, all 43 of them, turned to look at me. I could feel their eyes like spotlights, hot and uncomfortable and full of questions I didn't have answers for. But the worst part? The absolute worst fucking part? Clara didn't look surprised. She didn't look confused or shocked or like she was trying to figure out why our daughter had just called another man daddy in front of God and everybody. She looked caught, like a kid with their hand in the cookie jar, wide-eyed and guilty and already working on an excuse. Miles had gone statue still, his face pale as the tablecloths. But Isla just kept hugging his leg like it was the most natural thing in the world, like she'd done it 1,000 times before. And maybe, Jesus Christ, maybe she had. The silence stretched on forever, thick as molasses and twice as suffocating. Someone dropped their napkin. A chair creaked. In the distance, a dog barked. Normal sounds from a normal world that suddenly felt 1,000,000 miles away from where I was standing, surrounded by the wreckage of my perfect life and my perfect marriage and my perfect family. 7 years. 7 years of anniversaries and birthday parties and Christmas mornings and bedtime stories. 7 years of I love yous and shared dreams and building something beautiful together. 7 years of thinking I knew exactly who I was and where I belonged. All destroyed by one little word from the mouth of a 4-year-old who didn't even know she'd just blown up everything I thought I knew about my life. Time moves funny when your world implodes. 1 second you're living in slow motion, watching every horrified face turn toward you like sunflowers following the sun, and the next you're hyper-aware of every sound, every breath, every heartbeat thundering in your ears like war drums. I stood there in the wreckage of my champagne flute, glass crunching under my dress shoes, and watched my life unravel in real time. Miles looked like he'd been struck by lightning. All the color had drained from his face, leaving him looking like some kind of wax figure under those golden string lights. His mouth was hanging open just slightly, like he wanted to say something but couldn't remember how words worked. His hands were hovering awkwardly over Isla's head where she was still clinging to his legs, and I could see the exact moment panic set in behind his eyes. This wasn't how he'd planned for this to come out. That much was obvious. But Clara? Clara looked like she was about to throw up. Her face had gone from that healthy glow to the color of old newspaper, gray and sickly. She was staring at me with this expression I'd never seen before, part terror, part guilt, part something else I couldn't quite put my finger on. Resignation, maybe. Like she'd been waiting for this shoe to drop for a long time and was almost relieved it was finally happening. Isla, sweet innocent Isla, had no clue she'd just detonated a nuclear bomb in the middle of our anniversary party. She was rubbing her eyes with the back of her hand, that universal 4-year-old signal that she was way past ready for bed. She'd probably been calling Miles daddy for months, maybe longer, and tonight was just the first time she'd slipped up in public. The thought made my stomach lurch. The silence was killing everyone. I could hear people shifting in their chairs, clearing their throats, probably wondering if they should pretend they hadn't heard what they'd just heard. Mrs. Patterson from next door was clutching her pearls, literally clutching her fucking pearls, and staring at us like we were some kind of reality TV train wreck she couldn't look away from. Tommy from work was the first one to break. He started to stand up, probably to come over and check on me, but his wife Janet grabbed his arm and yanked him back down. Smart woman. This wasn't the kind of situation where you wanted to get involved. Then Bryce, good old Bryce who'd been my best man and had never learned when to keep his mouth shut, muttered just loud enough for half the party to hear. What the hell? That seemed to snap Clara out of her trance. She took a shaky step toward me, her hands reaching out like she was approaching a wild animal. Grayson, she said, and her voice was all wrong. Too high, too breathy, too desperate. Grayson, I can explain. Don't. The word came out harder than I'd intended, sharp enough to cut glass. I could feel every eye in the backyard focused on us, could practically hear people holding their breath waiting to see what would happen next. This was supposed to be our celebration, our moment, our night. Instead, it had turned into the kind of public humiliation that people would be talking about for years. I walked past Clara without looking at her, my legs feeling like they were made of concrete. Each step felt deliberate, like I was moving through thick water. Isla was still hugging Miles' leg, and when I approached them, she looked up at me with those big blue eyes, the eyes I'd been so proud of, thinking she'd gotten them from me. "Hey, baby girl," I said, and somehow my voice came out steady and calm even though everything inside me was screaming. I crouched down to her level and gently untangled her arms from Miles' leg. She didn't resist, just transferred her sleepy weight to me like she always did. For a moment, just for a moment, she was still my daughter. Still my little girl who needed her daddy, her real daddy, to take care of her. I picked her up, and she immediately buried her face in my neck, her tiny arms wrapping around me. She smelled like vanilla frosting and bubble bath, familiar and innocent, and completely unaware of the chaos swirling around her. I looked around until I spotted Noelle, Clara's sister, sitting at the family table with her mouth hanging open like everyone else. "Noelle," I called out, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet backyard. She jumped like I'd fired a gun. "Take her upstairs. Get her ready for bed. She's done nothing wrong." Noelle nodded quickly, stumbling over her own feet as she rushed over to us. I transferred Isla into her aunt's arms, and she went willingly, already half asleep. As Noelle hurried toward the house, I heard Isla mumble something about wanting her stuffed elephant, and it nearly broke me. She was just a kid. Just a tired 4-year-old who didn't understand that she'd just blown up her entire family with one innocent word. I turned back to face the crowd, and 42 pairs of eyes were staring at me like I was about to give a speech. Maybe I was. I looked at all these people, friends, family, co-workers, neighbors, who'd come here tonight to celebrate Clara and me, to toast our marriage and our happiness and our perfect little life. They dressed up and brought gifts and carved time out of their busy schedules to be here for us. "Thank you all for coming," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the still night air. "The party's over. You can see yourselves out." The silence that followed was deafening. Then chairs started scraping against stone as people began to move, slowly at first, then faster as they realized I was serious. Conversations started up in hushed whispers as folks gathered their purses and jackets, shooting glances back at us like we were some kind of car accident they couldn't stop looking at. Clara was crying now, big ugly tears streaming down her cheeks and ruining her makeup. She reached for me, her hand trembling as it stretched toward my arm. "Grayson, please." I stepped back, shaking my head. The look on her face would have broken my heart an hour ago. Now it just pissed me off. "You can leave too," I said, looking between her and Miles, who was still standing there like a deer in headlights. "Both of you." And just like that, 7 years of marriage, 7 years of trust, 7 years of building a life together, came crashing down around us like a house of cards in a hurricane. The house felt like a tomb after everyone left. You know how places can feel different depending on what's happened in them? Like how a hospital room feels cold even when the heat's cranked up, or how your childhood bedroom feels smaller when you visit as an adult. That's what my house felt like now, hollow and strange, like all the warmth had been sucked out through the windows along with my guests. I sat in my study, the one room in the house that was completely mine. Clara never came in here, said it smelled like old leather and bourbon, which was probably true since that's exactly what I'd been going for when I set it up. The walls were lined with law books from my college days, first edition novels I'd collected over the years, and a few framed photos from better times. There was one of Clara and me on our honeymoon in Tuscany, both of us grinning like idiots in front of some ancient church whose name I couldn't remember. We looked so young, so fucking naive. I looked happy. She looked, well, now I wasn't sure what she looked like. The wedding photo was sitting right there on my desk, taunting me. We'd had it professionally done, one of those expensive black and white shots that cost more than my first car. Clara in her vintage lace dress, me in my grandfather's tuxedo, both of us staring at the camera like we had all the answers. Her smile was radiant, picture perfect, the kind of smile that made people stop and stare. But now, sitting here with everything I thought I knew crumbling around me, that smile looked different. Fake, maybe. Practiced. Like she was performing rather than feeling. Had it always been fake? That was the question eating at me, gnawing at my brain like some kind of parasite. How long had she been lying? How long had I been living in some elaborate fantasy while she played house with me and played whatever the hell she was playing with Miles? My phone buzzed against the mahogany desk, the vibration unnaturally loud in the quiet room. Miles' name lit up the screen, and I stared at it like it was a snake that might bite me. The bastard had some nerve calling me after what had just happened. What was he going to say? Sorry for fucking your wife. Sorry for letting your daughter call me daddy. Sorry for making me look like a complete fool in front of everyone I know. I let it go to voicemail. Then it buzzed again. Clara this time. Then Miles again. Then Clara. They were tag-teaming me, probably sitting together somewhere. Maybe in his car, maybe at his apartment, maybe at some hotel they'd been using for their little rendezvous. The thought made my stomach turn. I turned the phone face down and reached for the bottle of Jameson I kept in the bottom drawer. The whiskey burned going down, but it was a good burn, clean and honest. Unlike everything else in my life, apparently. That's when I started thinking about all the times I'd been such a trusting idiot. All the red flags I'd ignored. All the excuses I'd swallowed. All the times I'd told myself I was being paranoid or jealous or insecure. Clara working late with Miles on projects. Clara having lunch with Miles to discuss strategy. Clara going to conferences with Miles because they were the marketing team. Clara's phone buzzing at all hours with texts from Miles about urgent work stuff. Jesus Christ, I'd even defended the guy. When my buddy Rick had made some joke about Clara's work husband at a barbecue last summer, I'd gotten pissed at him. Told him he was being an ass, that Clara and Miles were just colleagues, that he didn't know what he was talking about. Rick had just shrugged and changed the subject, but now I wondered what he'd seen that I'd been too blind to notice. I got up and walked over to the bookshelf where we kept our photo albums. You know, the old-fashioned kind with actual printed photos, because Clara insisted they were more authentic than digital albums. I pulled out the one from Isla's second birthday party and started flipping through it. There were the usual shots. Isla with cake all over her face, the family gathered around the dining room table, kids running around in the backyard. And there was Miles, in at least half the photos. Not just in the background, but right there in the middle of everything, like he belonged. Like he was family. There he was helping Isla blow out her candles. There he was carrying her on his shoulders. There he was sitting next to Clara at the picnic table, their heads bent together over something on her phone. I flipped to another album. Isla's third birthday. Miles again. Christmas morning last year. Miles fucking Davidson opening presents with my family like he lived there. 4th of July barbecue. Miles grilling burgers in my backyard while I was inside getting drinks. How had I not seen it? How had I been so goddamn blind? But the worst part, the part that made me slam the album shut and reach for the whiskey bottle again, was realizing that Miles wasn't just in the photos. He was in all the important moments. All the family milestones. All the times that should have been about Clara and me and Isla, our little family, our perfect life. He'd been there the whole time, hadn't he? Not just as Clara's co-worker or friend or whatever bullshit story they'd been selling. He'd been there as what? Isla's real father? Clara's real partner? The other man in my marriage that I'd been too stupid to see? My phone buzzed again. Clara. I stared at her name on the screen, remembering all the times I'd smiled when I saw it. All the times my heart had done a little skip when she called or texted. Now it just made me feel sick. I didn't answer. I had nothing to say to her right now. Nothing that wouldn't end with me saying things I couldn't take back, doing things I'd regret. Instead, I sat there in my leather chair, surrounded by the remnants of a life I thought I knew, and tried to figure out how the hell I'd ended up here. Outside, the night was quiet except for the occasional car passing by, people heading home from their own parties, their own celebrations, their own normal lives where wives didn't fuck their coworkers and 4-year-olds didn't accidentally blow up entire families with one innocent word. I poured another whiskey and settled in for what I knew was going to be the longest night of my life. Morning came whether I wanted it to or not. I hadn't slept a damn minute, just sat in that leather chair all night, working my way through half a bottle of Jameson and staring at the ceiling like the answers to my life might be written up there in invisible ink. When the first rays of sunlight started creeping through the blinds, I felt like I'd aged about 10 years in 8 hours. The house was still dead quiet. Noelle had taken Isla to her hotel after putting her to bed, which was probably for the best. I wasn't ready to explain to a 4-year-old why mommy and daddy were fighting, or why that man she'd been calling daddy wasn't going to be around anymore, or any of the other impossible conversations that were waiting for me down the road. But first things first, I needed to call Darla. Darla Kent had been my personal attorney for the better part of 6 years, ever since I'd needed her help with some contract disputes when I first started my consulting firm. She was sharp as a razor blade and twice as cutting when she needed to be. More importantly, she didn't mess around with pleasantries or hand-holding. When your life was falling apart, that's exactly the kind of lawyer you wanted in your corner. I called her office at 8:30 on the dot, knowing she'd be there. Darla was one of those people who probably slept in a business suit and kept legal briefs on her nightstand for light reading. Grayson, her voice was crisp and professional, but I could hear the curiosity underneath. This is early, even for you. What's going on? I took a deep breath, tasting stale whiskey and regret. Darla, I need to discuss divorce and paternity. The silence on the other end of the line stretched out so long I thought the call might have dropped. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, softer, more careful. Jesus, Gray. I'm sorry. What happened? It's a long story, and I'd rather tell it once. Can you clear your schedule today? I know it's Saturday, but I'll clear my schedule, she said without hesitation. Come in at noon. And Grayson, bring everything. Documents, photos, bank statements, credit card records, phone bills. Everything you can get your hands on. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. That's why I kept Darla on retainer. She didn't waste time asking questions she'd get answers to anyway, and she sure as hell didn't waste time feeling sorry for me. She just got to work. After I hung up, I spent the next 3.5 hours turning into a man I didn't recognize. The old Grayson, the trusting husband who gave people the benefit of the doubt and assumed the best in everyone, was gone. In his place was someone methodical, cold, and absolutely fucking furious in the quietest possible way. I started with Clara's laptop. She'd left it on the kitchen counter when she'd rushed out last night, probably too panicked to remember to grab it. Her password was Isla's birthday. Of course it was. I'd helped her set it up 2 years ago when her old one crashed. Another little irony to add to the pile. Her email was a goldmine. Not because there were smoking gun love letters or anything that obvious. Clara was smarter than that. But because of the patterns. The timestamps on emails to and from Miles. Late nights, early mornings, weekends. Working on the Henderson proposal, she'd write. But the timestamp said 11:47 p.m. on a Sunday. Quick strategy meeting. At 6:15 a.m. on a Saturday. I printed everything. Every email, every text thread I could access. Every calendar entry that mentioned Miles or late meetings or overnight business trips. The printer in my study worked overtime, churning out page after page of evidence that my marriage had been a lie for longer than I wanted to think about. Then I moved on to the credit card statements. This was where things got really interesting. Dinners at expensive restaurants on nights when Clara told me she was working late. Hotel charges in cities where Morrison and Associates definitely didn't have clients. Two-person spa packages when she was supposedly at solo conferences. Jewelry purchases I'd never seen her wear. The GPS logs from Clara's car were even better. Turns out when you pay for the premium insurance package, they track everywhere you go for safety purposes. Clara's car had been spending a lot of time at Miles' apartment complex. A lot of time. Mornings, afternoons, weekends when she told me she was shopping or getting her nails done or having lunch with her sister. I created files, labeled them, organized everything chronologically and by category. Financial records, communication logs, location data, character witnesses. I made a list of everyone who might have seen something or heard something or suspected something. By the time I was done, I had enough evidence to sink a battleship. But the real smoking gun was buried in Clara's phone records, which I was able to access through our shared family plan. Hundreds of texts to Miles. Thousands, maybe. Some days they were texting each other more than Clara, and I talked face to face. The pattern was clear as day once you knew what to look for. Their communication would spike right before Clara's mysterious late nights or weekend disappearances. I found business expense reports where Miles was listed as a consultant on some of Clara's marketing projects. That was interesting. Company money being used to pay for their little affair, probably. Silas Moreno, my business partner and mutual investor, was going to love hearing about that. He'd invested in Morrison and Associates through our firm's recommendation, and he didn't take kindly to people playing games with his money. By 11:30, I had 3 thick folders full of documentation. Everything was printed, labeled, and cross-referenced. I'd build a case that would make any divorce attorney weep with joy and any cheating spouse weep for completely different reasons. The old me would have felt sick about going through Clara's private things, about violating her trust, about building a case against the woman I'd promised to love and honor. But the old me had been played for a fool for God knows how long. The new me? The new me was done being the nice guy. I loaded everything into my briefcase, straightened my tie, and headed out to meet Darla. It was time to stop being the victim in this story and start being the guy who fought back. 2 days. I gave myself exactly 2 days to get my ducks in a row before I called Clara. 2 days to meet with Darla. 2 days to process everything I discovered. 2 days to decide exactly how I wanted to handle this shitstorm. By Wednesday morning, I was ready for war. Clara had been staying at her cousin Michelle's place across town, according to Noelle, who'd been playing messenger between us. Apparently, Clara was devastated and couldn't understand why I wouldn't just talk to her. The audacity was almost impressive. For years of lying to my face, and she couldn't understand why I might need a minute to process things. I called her around 10 a.m., keeping my voice steady and businesslike. "We need to talk. Come to the house at 2. Just you. Grayson." "Thank God," she said, and I could hear the relief flooding her voice. "I've been trying to call you, but 2 o'clock, I repeated. "Just you, Clara. Not Miles, not your sister, not anyone else. We have things to discuss." The line went quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said finally, and her voice was smaller now, more cautious. "I'll be there." I spent the morning setting up what Darla had called the presentation. She'd coached me on this part, told me that showing rather than telling was always more effective in these situations. People could argue with words, but they couldn't argue with documentation, especially when that documentation was spread across the dining room table like a fucking war map. When Clara's car pulled into the driveway at exactly 2 o'clock, I was ready. I'd arranged everything perfectly. The credit card statements in one pile, the GPS logs in another, the email printouts in a third. Photos from her laptop showing her and Miles at restaurants I'd never been to, hotels I'd never heard of, company events where they looked way too comfortable together. Bank records showing cash withdrawals that lined up perfectly with her shopping trips. Phone records showing text conversations that went on for hours while she was sitting right next to me on the couch, supposedly watching Netflix. She knocked, which was weird. Clara had never knocked on her own front door in 7 years of marriage. I guess that's what guilt does to people, makes them strangers in their own homes. When I opened the door, she looked terrible. Her hair was unwashed and thrown up in a messy bun. Her eyes were red and puffy from crying, and she was wearing the same clothes she'd had on at the party. She looked like she hadn't slept any better than I had, which gave me exactly zero satisfaction. "Hi," she said, and her voice cracked on just that one word. I stepped aside to let her in, and she followed me to the dining room. When she saw the table, she stopped dead in her tracks. I watched her face as she took it all in, the neat piles of evidence, the printed photos, the highlighted bank statements. She went even paler than she already was, if that was possible. "Sit down," I said, pulling out a chair for her like the gentleman I'd been raised to be. Funny how manners stick with you even when your world's falling apart. She sat, but she couldn't stop staring at the table. Her hands were shaking as she reached for one of the photos, a shot from her laptop showing her and Miles at some fancy steakhouse downtown. They were holding hands across the table, looking at each other like they were the only two people in the world. "Grayson," she started, and here came the waterworks. "Right on schedule. Please, I didn't mean for this to happen. It just, don't." I sat down across from her, the table full of evidence between us like a battlefield. "Don't insult my intelligence any more than you already have." I picked up the folder labeled Financial and opened it. Let's start with the easy stuff. The Marriott downtown, March 15th. 2-night stay, charged to your credit card. You told me you were at a conference in Jacksonville. She opened her mouth, probably to lie some more, but I held up my hand. The Pearl Room, April 22nd. Dinner for $247 with tip. You told me you were working late on the Morrison account. I flipped to another page. Cartier Jewelry Store, May 3rd. $800 purchase. Funny thing is, I've never seen you wear anything new from Cartier. Each item hit her like a physical blow. She was crying harder now, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way," she managed between tears. "How was it supposed to happen, Clara?" I asked, and my voice was so calm it surprised even me. "Did you have a plan for how you were going to tell me my daughter isn't mine? Or were you just going to keep letting me pay for everything while you played house with your boyfriend?" She flinched at the word boyfriend, like I'd slapped her. "He's not. We're not. For years." I pulled out the GPS logs and spread them across the table. 4 fucking years, Clara. Look at this. I pointed to the highlighted entries. Your car at his apartment complex, sometimes 3 times a week. Staying for hours. Overnight visits when you told me you were at your sister's. She was shaking her head now, like she could somehow deny what was right there in black and white. You went through my things. You spied on me. The accusation hit me wrong, and for the first time since she'd walked in, I felt my composure crack. I spied on you. I'm the bad guy here. You've been lying to me for 4 years, letting me raise another man's child, making me look like a fool in front of everyone we know, and you're pissed that I went through your laptop. I stood up, needing to move, needing to put some distance between us before I said something I couldn't take back. You know what the worst part is? I defended you. When people made jokes about your work husband, I told them they were wrong. When my friends said Miles seemed too close to you, I told them they didn't know what they were talking about. I was such a good husband, such a trusting husband, that I made myself into a fucking laughingstock. Clara was sobbing now, her face buried in her hands. I'm sorry, she kept saying, over and over like a broken record. I'm so sorry, Grayson. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did hurt me, I said, sitting back down. And now we have to figure out what comes next. I pulled out one more folder, the one labeled legal. I want a DNA test for Isla. I want divorce papers filed by the end of the week. And I want full custody. She looked up at me then, and for the first time since she'd walked in, there was something other than guilt in her eyes. There was fear. You can't take her away from me. She's my daughter. Is she mine? I asked. The question hung in the air between us like a loaded gun. Clara's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. And in that silence, in that moment of hesitation, I got my answer. Darla moved like a woman possessed. By Thursday afternoon, she'd already filed the preliminary divorce papers and scheduled the DNA test for the following Monday. When Darla Kent decided to destroy someone's life, she didn't mess around with half measures. Clara tried to stall, of course, had her own lawyer request extensions, claimed she needed time to process everything. The usual bullshit people pull when they know they're caught red-handed and are hoping for a miracle. But Darla shut that down faster than a bouncer at closing time. Your client had 4 years to process her decisions, she told Clara's attorney during a conference call I was allowed to listen in on. Now she can process the consequences. I love that woman. Reminded me why I paid her retainer every year even when I didn't need legal help. While Clara was busy playing the victim and trying to buy time, I was making moves of my own. See, there's something most people don't understand about revenge. It's not about getting mad and lashing out like some kind of wild animal. Real revenge, the kind that actually matters, is about being smart. It's about thinking 3 steps ahead and hitting people where it hurts most. For Clara and Miles, that place was their careers. I'd been doing business with Silas Moreno for almost 5 years now. He was one of those old-school investors who'd made his money the hard way and didn't tolerate bullshit from anyone. His company had a stake in Morrison & Associates through our mutual fund, and when Silas invested in something, he paid attention to every detail, including how his money was being spent and who was doing the spending. So on Friday morning, I invited Silas to lunch at the Capitol Grill downtown. Nice, quiet place where we could talk business without half the city listening in. Silas was already seated when I arrived, looking like he always did. Expensive suit, perfectly trimmed gray beard, eyes that missed nothing. Grayson, he said, standing to shake my hand. You sounded upset on the phone. Everything all right? That depends on how you define all right, I said, settling into my chair. We ordered steaks for both of us, because Silas was a meat and potatoes kind of guy, and I waited until the waiter was out of earshot before I started talking. I need to show you something, I said, pulling out a folder. Not the thick ones from my confrontation with Clara, but a smaller, more focused collection. It's about Morrison & Associates. I laid out the evidence carefully. The business expense reports showing Miles listed as a consultant on projects he had no business being involved in. The hotel charges and restaurant bills that had been filed under client entertainment, when the only clients being entertained were Clara and Miles themselves. The conference expenses that turned into romantic getaways on the company's dime. Silas didn't say a word while I walked him through it all, just studied each document with the same intensity he probably used to analyze quarterly reports. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and was quiet for a long moment. How long? He asked finally. Near as I can tell? About 3 years. Maybe longer. And you discovered this how? I told him about the anniversary party, about Isla calling Miles daddy, about everything that had happened since. Silas listened without interrupting, his expression getting darker with every detail. Son of a bitch, he said when I finished. I'm sorry, Grayson. This is a hell of a thing. I'm not looking for sympathy, I said. I'm looking for justice. Silas smiled then, and it wasn't a nice smile. What did you have in mind? Morrison and Associates has been using your investment money to fund an affair. That's fraud, pure and simple. You pull your funding, recommend that your other investors do the same, and suddenly Clara and Miles don't have jobs anymore. And if they try to find work elsewhere? Word gets around in our business community. People talk. Especially when there's documentation. Silas was nodding now, and I could see the gears turning in his head. You know what I like about you, Grayson? You think things through. Most people in your situation would just start swinging punches and hope something landed. You're building a strategy. I'm building a case, I corrected. There's a difference. We finished lunch talking about the specifics. How Silas would handle the withdrawal of funds, which other investors he'd contact, how the word would spread through the business community. By the time we shook hands in the parking lot, Clara and Miles were already finished. They just didn't know it yet. But that was only the beginning. You see, there's something about small cities that people from big places don't understand. Everyone knows everyone, and gossip travels faster than the speed of light. Especially gossip about cheating spouses and secret affairs and little girls calling the wrong man daddy at anniversary parties. I didn't have to spread the story myself. Hell, I didn't even want to. But people who'd been at the party were already talking, and people who hadn't been there were asking questions. The whispers had started at the grocery store, moved to the country club, spread through the office buildings downtown. By the end of the week, everyone in our social circle knew what had happened. And you know what? I let them talk. Didn't confirm anything, didn't deny anything. Just let the truth speak for itself. Because the truth was ugly enough without me having to embellish it. Clara tried calling me over the weekend, probably to beg me to do some kind of damage control. Make a statement, tell people it was all a misunderstanding, something to stop the bleeding. But I was done protecting her reputation. She'd made her choices, and now she could live with the consequences. By Monday morning, when we walked into the clinic for Isla's DNA test, Clara looked like she'd aged 5 years in 5 days. Good. Maybe now she was starting to understand what it felt like to have your whole world fall apart in public. The test itself was simple enough. Cheek swabs for both of us, a few forms to fill out, and then we wait. The technician said results would be ready in 3 to 5 business days. Walking out of that clinic, I felt something I hadn't felt since the night of the party. Hope. Not hope that Isla was mine. Honestly, I was pretty sure she wasn't. But hope that soon I'd have the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And once I had that, Clara and Miles were going to learn what happened when you fucked with the wrong guy. You know what they say about fighting fire with fire? Sometimes the best way to deal with a public humiliation is with a little public truth-telling of your own. Clara and Miles had made me look like a fool in front of everyone I cared about, so I figured it was time to return the favor. The idea came to me on Wednesday night, exactly 1 week after the anniversary party from hell. I was sitting in my study again, going through the mail that had been piling up, when I found it. A fancy cream-colored invitation with gold lettering. Janet Morrison, Clara's boss at Morrison and Associates, was hosting her annual charity dinner the following Saturday. An evening of gratitude, the invitation called it. A fundraiser for the local children's hospital, with silent auctions and speeches and all the social bullshit that people like us were expected to attend. I'd completely forgotten about it. Clara and I had RSVP'd months ago, back when we were still pretending to be a happy couple. Under normal circumstances, I would have stayed home and spent the evening with a bottle of bourbon and some old movies. But these weren't normal circumstances, and I wasn't feeling particularly normal myself. I called Janet's assistant the next morning and confirmed my attendance. Just me, I told her. Clara wouldn't be able to make it. Family emergency, you understand. Then I made another call. To June Hartley. June ran a lifestyle blog called River City Social that had become pretty popular over the last couple of years. She covered all the local charity events, society parties, business openings, basically anything that involved people with money making other people with money feel important. She had about 50,000 followers, which in a city our size meant she basically controlled the social narrative for anyone who mattered. More importantly, June had been at our anniversary party. She'd seen the whole thing go down. "Grayson," she said when I called. "Oh, honey, I've been thinking about you all week. How are you holding up?" "I'm doing all right, June. Listen, I know this is last minute, but are you planning to cover Janet Morrison's charity dinner on Saturday?" "Of course. It's one of the biggest events of the season." "What?" "I was wondering if you'd like an exclusive. The real story behind what happened at my anniversary party." The line went quiet for about 3 seconds. Then, "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. I'll be at the dinner, and if you want to hear my side of things, I'm ready to talk." "Grayson, are you sure about this? Once something like this goes public, there's no taking it back." I thought about Clara and Miles, probably holed up somewhere planning their next move, figuring out how to spin this whole thing to make themselves look like the victims. I thought about all the people who'd been whispering behind my back, wondering if I'd known about the affair all along. I thought about Isla, who deserved to know the truth about where she came from, even if that truth was ugly. "I'm sure," I said. Saturday night came faster than I expected. I put on my best suit, the charcoal gray one Clara had always said made me look distinguished, and drove downtown to the Riverside Country Club. The place was packed, exactly like every year. The same crowd of lawyers and business owners and old money families who showed up to every charity event in town, writing checks and making small talk and pretending they gave a damn about anything other than being seen. I worked the room for about an hour, accepting condolences and deflecting questions with a smile that felt like it was carved out of stone. People were being careful around me, like I might break down crying or start throwing punches at any moment, which was probably smart of them, considering what I was planning. June found me during the cocktail hour, looking elegant as always in a black dress that probably cost more than most people's rent. "You ready for this?" she asked quietly. "More than ready." She led me to a quiet corner near the silent auction tables, away from the main crowd, but still visible to anyone who cared to look. She pulled out her phone and set it to record, then gave me a nod. "Grayson Mitchell," she said in her professional voice. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with me tonight. It's been a difficult week for you, I imagine." "It has," I said, looking directly into the camera. "But sometimes difficult weeks lead to important conversations." And then I told the story. All of it. The anniversary party, Isla calling Miles daddy, the evidence I'd found, the 4 years of lies and deception. I was calm, factual, almost clinical in how I laid it out. I didn't call Clara names or get emotional or try to make myself look like some kind of saint. I just told the truth, plain and simple. When I got to the part about the financial fraud, the company money that had been used to fund their affair, I could see people at nearby tables starting to pay attention. Conversations were stopping mid-sentence as folks realized what they were hearing. "The DNA test results came back yesterday," I said, looking straight into June's phone camera. "Isla is not my biological daughter. She's Miles Davidson's daughter, and Clara has known that since the day she was born." The silence around us was deafening. Even the jazz band seemed to be playing quieter. "So what's next for you?" June asked. "Justice," I said simply. For 4 years, I was lied to, manipulated, and made to look like a fool. My daughter, the little girl I raised and loved, isn't mine. My marriage was a fraud. My trust was violated in the worst possible way, and the people responsible for that are going to face the consequences. I stood up then, straightening my jacket. "Thank you for giving me the chance to set the record straight, June. I hope your readers understand that sometimes the truth is ugly, but it's still the truth." I walked away from that interview feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Behind me, I could hear the buzz of conversation starting up again, people processing what they'd just witnessed. By the time I made it to the valet stand, my phone was already buzzing with text messages. June's blog post went live at midnight. "When your wife's best friend is actually her baby daddy." A River City scandal got more views in its first hour than any post in the blog's history. By Sunday morning, it had been shared on Facebook 800 times and was trending on local Twitter. Clara tried calling me 17 times that day. I didn't answer any of them. The truth was out there now, and there was no putting it back in the bottle. Good. Let everyone know exactly who Clara and Miles really were. Let them try to rebuild their reputations from the smoking ruins of their lies. My work was just getting started. The DNA test results came in on a Tuesday morning, delivered by certified mail like a final verdict. I already knew what they'd say. Hell, I'd known since that moment of silence in my dining room when Clara couldn't answer my question, but seeing it in black and white still hit different. The probability of paternity is 0%. Zero. Not even close. For years of my life spent raising another man's daughter while being played for the biggest fool in the county. It should have broken me. Should have sent me spiraling into some kind of emotional breakdown. Instead, I felt something cold and sharp settle into my chest. Relief, maybe. Or maybe just the satisfaction of finally having proof of what I'd suspected all along. I called Darla immediately. "We got him," I said when she picked up. "The paternity results? 0% chance Isla is mine, which means we can file for emotional fraud. I'll have the paperwork ready by noon," Darla said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice too. She loved cases like this, where the evidence was so overwhelming that the other side had no choice but to roll over and take their beating. The emotional fraud case was Darla's masterpiece. In our state, you could sue for damages when someone deliberately deceived you about the paternity of a child, especially when financial support was involved. For years of diapers, daycare, medical bills, clothes, toys, birthday parties, it all added up to a substantial amount of money. Money that Miles should have been paying instead of me. But the real kicker was the financial misconduct charges. Remember all those business expenses that Clara and Miles had been billing to Morrison and Associates? All those romantic dinners and hotel stays and weekend getaways? Turns out using company funds for personal affairs is considered embezzlement in the eyes of the law. Who knew? Darla filed everything on Thursday. By Friday afternoon, Miles was being served with paternity papers and a lawsuit demanding 4 years of backdated child support, plus interest. The state doesn't mess around when it comes to deadbeat dads, even ones who didn't know they were dads in the first place. Clara got hit even harder. No spousal support due to adultery and financial fraud. No claim to the house, since it was in my name before we got married. No joint custody of Isla, since she wasn't my biological child and Clara had been lying about paternity for years. The court basically told her to take her sob story and shove it. Meanwhile, the dominoes kept falling in other areas of their lives. Silas had pulled his investment from Morrison and Associates, and word had gotten around to his network of other investors. Turns out rich people don't like it when their money gets used to fund office affairs. Who could have seen that coming? Miles got suspended from his job pending an internal investigation into the misuse of company funds. Then the suspension became termination when the investigation found exactly what we all knew they'd find. Clara managed to hang on to her position a little longer, but the writing was on the wall. Nobody wanted to work with the woman who'd been stealing company money to cheat on her husband. I heard through the grapevine that Miles' girlfriend, the poor woman who'd been dating him while he was playing daddy to another woman's kid, had dumped him the day after June's blog post went viral. Apparently, she wasn't too thrilled to discover her boyfriend had been living a double life for 4 years. Can't imagine why that would bother her. The best part? The absolute best fucking part. Miles tried to claim he hadn't known Isla was his daughter. Tried to say Clara had told him I was the father and he believed her. But Darla had done her homework, and she had text messages proving otherwise. Messages where Miles called Isla our 3* daughter and talked about wanting to be a real family with Clara. Messages where they discussed how to handle the situation if I ever found out the truth. Watching them both get destroyed piece by piece was like watching a masterclass in consequences. Every lie they'd told, every scheme they'd cooked up, every moment of deception over the past 4 years was coming back to bite them in the ass with compound interest. Clara tried reaching out one more time, calling from a number I didn't recognize. She was crying, begging, saying she'd do anything to make things right. But there was nothing to make right anymore. She'd burned that bridge to ash, and I wasn't in the business of rebuilding bridges for people who'd already shown me exactly who they were. The scales of justice might be slow, but they're thorough as hell when they finally get moving. Clara came to the house one last time on a gray Thursday afternoon in November. I'd been expecting it, honestly. Darla had told me the divorce would be finalized by the end of the week, and Clara still had some personal stuff scattered around the house. Photos, jewelry, books, the kind of sentimental crap that somehow accumulates over 7 years of marriage. I watched from the living room window as she sat in her car for almost 10 minutes before getting out. She looked like hell. Her hair was stringy and unwashed, hanging around her face like curtains. She'd lost weight, the kind of rapid weight loss that comes from stress and not eating right. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by jeans and a faded sweater that had seen better days. When she finally knocked, I took my time answering. Let her stand there and think about what she wanted to say. Let her marinate in the awkwardness of having to ask permission to enter the house that used to be hers too. "Hi," she said when I opened the door. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I stepped aside without saying anything, and she walked past me toward the stairs, probably heading to what used to be our bedroom to collect whatever she'd left behind. But I wasn't in the mood for her to wander around the house like she still belonged here. "I packed your things," I said. "They're in the garage." She stopped halfway to the stairs and turned around. "All of them. Everything that was yours. Photos, clothes, books, your grandmother's jewelry box. All of it." She nodded and followed me through the kitchen to the garage, where I'd spent the better part of last weekend boxing up the remnants of our marriage. 3 cardboard boxes and 2 suitcases, sitting there like evidence of a life that no longer existed. Clara opened one of the boxes and started going through it, her hands shaking slightly as she touched familiar objects. A framed photo of us from our honeymoon, a ceramic mug from our trip to Vermont, a book of poetry I'd given her for our 2nd anniversary. "Grayson," she said finally, not looking up from the box. "I know you probably don't want to hear this, but I need you to know I didn't plan for any of this to happen. It just happened." I leaned against the workbench and crossed my arms. "Nothing just happens, Clara. You made choices. Every day for 4 years, you made choices. But she's still your daughter," she said, and now she was looking at me with those red-rimmed eyes. "In your heart, she's still your daughter. The DNA doesn't change that." That was the moment I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. The moment when she'd try to use Isla as ammunition, try to guilt me into feeling something other than the cold emptiness that had taken up residence in my chest. I walked over to the shelf where I'd left one final box, smaller than the others. Inside were all the anniversary cards she'd written me over the years, a pair of tiny baby shoes from when Isla was born, and a folded piece of paper. "Here," I said, handing her the box. "This is for you too." She opened it with trembling fingers and unfolded the note. On it, I'd written in my careful handwriting, "Here's the life you threw away. Congratulations." Her face crumpled, and the tears started again, big, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. "How can you be so cruel?" she managed between gasps. "Cruel?" I said, my voice perfectly calm. "I spent 4 years being kind, Clara. Being understanding. Being the good husband who trusted his wife and never asked too many questions. Look where that got me." I walked toward the door that led back into the house. "Take your things and go. Don't come back here again." She called my name as I walked away, but I didn't turn around. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to feel, nothing left to salvage from the wreckage of what we used to be. 20 minutes later, I heard her car start and pull out of the driveway. I didn't watch her leave. 3 months later, I was a different man living in a different house in what felt like a completely different life. The old Grayson, the trusting husband, the devoted father, the guy who always assumed the best in people, was gone. In his place was someone harder, smarter, more careful about who he let into his world. I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing, but it was the truth. The house felt bigger without Clara's stuff cluttering up the rooms. Noelle had helped me redecorate, getting rid of the throw pillows and scented candles and all the feminine touches that had made the place feel like home. Now it looked like what it actually was, a bachelor pad for a man starting over at 34. I'd thrown myself into work, taking on new clients and expanding the consulting business. Turns out having your personal life implode gives you a lot of extra time to focus on making money. I'd also started something new, a support group for men dealing with paternity fraud and infidelity. We met every Thursday night at the community center, just 6 or 7 guys sitting in a circle and talking about the worst moments of their lives. It wasn't therapy exactly, more like a war stories club for men who'd been through the same kind of betrayal. Dave, whose wife had been cheating with his brother for 3 years. Marcus, who found out his twins weren't his when one of them needed a kidney transplant. Bobby, whose fiancée had been living a double life with her ex-boyfriend right up until their wedding day. We called ourselves the Truth Seekers, which probably sounded ridiculous to anyone on the outside, but it meant something to us. We were the guys who'd been lied to, manipulated, made to look like fools, and we'd come out the other side with our dignity intact. That's where I was on a Tuesday evening in February when someone knocked on my front door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and most people called before showing up these days. When I opened the door, there was a man about my age standing on the porch, nervous as hell and shifting from foot to foot. "Are you Grayson?" he asked. "Depends who's asking. My name's Theo Martinez. I read your story on that blog, and I think you might have saved my wife's life." I invited him in, made coffee, and listened to his story. His wife Maria had been going through something similar. Suspicious behavior from her husband, weird phone calls, unexplained absences. But instead of confronting him directly, she'd read June's blog post about my situation and decided to do some investigating of her own. "She found everything," Theo said, shaking his head in amazement. "Bank records, hotel receipts, text messages, the whole thing." And when she confronted him, he broke down and confessed to everything. 3 years of cheating, money he'd been stealing from their joint account, even a second cell phone she never knew about. "That's rough," I said, "but it sounds like she handled it the right way." "That's just it," Theo said, leaning forward in his chair. "She said reading about how you gathered evidence and built a case. She said it gave her the courage to do the same thing instead of just ignoring the signs and hoping they'd go away." We talked for another hour, and when Theo left, he shook my hand and said something that stuck with me. "You turned the worst thing that ever happened to you into something that helped other people. That takes a special kind of strength." Standing in my doorway, watching his taillights disappear down the street, I realized something I hadn't expected. This wasn't the end of my story. It wasn't even the end of a chapter. It was the beginning of something new, a version of myself that had been forged in the fire of betrayal and come out stronger on the other side. Clara and Miles had lost everything that mattered. Their reputations, their careers, their dignity, their future together. But I had gained something they'd never understand, the knowledge that I could survive anything.